Hello everyone, I'm Umair, and we are on another episode of Better Tech. Today we have David McCall. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Is that so?
Perfectly. Yes, sir.
All right. So we have David McCall with us, and another top level executive, been into the data center business for quite some time. And we were talking just before the podcast, having a wonderful opinion on most of the technical and non-technical side of the things. So we'll hope that we have a great discussion today and enjoy our time together. So David, thank you very much for being on our show, and let's kick it off.
All right, I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for welcoming me.
So just to kick things off, how about you take a few minutes and tell us about yourself, what you do, your company, your journey so far, and
Sure.
see how the discussion progress.
Okay. Well, I have been in the IT business for, probably 30 years. I've been in the data center business for about 20 years. I work for a data center company out of the US called QTS Data Centres. We're one of the largest private REITs. We were private for many years. We went public in 2013. We went back private in 2021. And I'm one of the original employees here. And so I've played a lot of roles, both in operations, business side, engineering, solutions for customers. So I have a lot of experience in those areas. But for the last 5 years, probably my favorite role, or certainly the funnest role, I've been an evangelist for our organization, which is a little unusual to have an evangelist for a data center company. But I spent a lot of time public speaking, at events and industry things around the country, and podcasts. We run our own podcast as well with a wide variety of topics. And so father of 3 20-year-old daughters who I'm trying to work off of my payroll so that my wife and I can spend more time doing our thing. But that's a little bit about me.
Wonderful. So we are talking to someone with tons of experience. So you said that it's interesting to be evangelist of a data center. So talk to us more about it. What do you evangelize about a data center? I mean, what do we have to understand still about data centers?
Well, instead of talking about data centers specifically, I'm going to go up a little bit and talk about digital infrastructure. In my opinion, there is no modern economy without a digital infrastructure or digital backbone. You have to have energy, you have to have connectivity, and then you have to have the data components that that's sort of that third leg of the stool. And a data center lands in the middle of that. There's no idea on earth that doesn't live in a data center. There's no formula for Coca-Cola, there's no song, there's no art, there's no artificial intelligence. It lives in somebody's data center. It may not be mine, it may be yours, it may be one of the big cloud providers. But a data center is essentially the platform that all the clouds and all the e-commerce and all of the systems live on. And so to be part of that is super important, but it brings a lot of responsibility. We're part of the ethical building processes. We have to be good stewards of resources. How are we consuming energy? How are we embracing the local community? How are we providing jobs? How are we providing security? If data is that valuable, which we believe it is, then we have a tremendous responsibility to make sure we build infrastructure that protects one of our most valuable resources. And so to be an evangelist part of that and talk about the benefits of it and how to have people join us in the endeavor and what we can do to help make our world better in this part of our ecosystem it's a joy. I love doing it.
Wonderful. And it's always, if you kind of enjoy what you're doing, there's nothing better than that, really. So one thing is, you mentioned while just talking that you were a public company, you went private again around 2021 or something. I think that was kind of a COVID time or something, and all the on-prem infrastructure actually moved in a hurry to, I believe, data centers and cloud infra. So that must be a time where potentially your business is like expanding like anything. So
Yeah.
there is some correlation or something, or maybe you don't want to touch upon that. That's one. I mean, I just got
Sure.
curious.
You know, when you're a public company, whether you're public or private, whoever it is that owns the organization, um, there are it incents behavior. You have to behave a certain way because it's my organization. If I own my home, to use my home and live in my home, you have to live in a certain way. When you're a public market, you have, in order to get access to capital, you have to behave a certain way on a quarterly basis. It's very, very difficult to say, you know what, we really believe that 12 years from now, we need to be in this part of Europe or this part of Africa or this part of choose India somewhere. How do I partner with that community? But I'm not prepared yet to execute on that fully realized strategy. I'm going to start building up the capability of the local community. I'm going to find the land and build the resources. But if I have to report to a market that says, wait a minute, you just spent how much money? And I want to see a return within a quarter or a couple quarters, very difficult to have a long-term strategy and do that doesn't get shaped. I'm not saying the marketplace isn't a great place to be and it fits, but as we look at building out digital infrastructure, in particular in unprecedented times, I mean, we thought there was a hockey stick of data before OpenAI unleashed its tools upon the public, and data consumption and use is just, we don't even know how. We don't even know what to call it. You can't even call it a hockey stick anymore. And so for organizations like ours, in order to go out and build campuses and infrastructure to help the world manage through this data explosion, to do it in a market, in a public marketplace, has constraints that make it more difficult than doing it in the private. Now you got to have the right private equity backer, and we're owned by Blackstone. And so we have the financial resources, which give us a competitive edge, but what it does is it allows us to stay to our core philosophy of building out digital infrastructure in a very natural, organic, strategic way, and not have it shaped by how the market ebbs or flows. It gives us a lot of freedom.
No, that's understandable. And one more question regarding data centers. I mean, so data center used to mean something to us ever since the data centers are now part of a platform such as like Amazon, Google, and Azure's of the world. So how it has just transformed the data center business as a whole? Because I mean, if you take a look at telcos, I mean, 10 years back or something, they have a meaningful service, but now that meaningful service from a voice is converted to building meaningful pipes that other applications can use, and voice is just one of the applications. So has data center also transformed in a different way that, I mean, and yesterday you have to have a data center, you own some servers. Now with Amazons and AWS of the world, you have a platform in front of all, and there's a data center behind. So how the business has changed?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm going to work backwards because I want to start with telco just for a second. Telco is from two words that got put together, which means long distance and communication. So when you think about telco, forever, whether you're talking about television, telephone, telegraph, the idea was disconnected, far away components that are trying to communicate together. And so you had these telecom organizations. Now you have, as my friend Dean Bubley out of the UK calls it, Paracom, which is you have the telecom, but you also have, just in your space right there, you have a tremendously powerful local connectivity thing just within those four walls. You and I sitting here are using a version of telecom, but you're also there on your site using this local. And for decades, the telecom sort of just inherited by default the local business, but that's being changed dramatically. There's so many people that are not trying to run the pipes, they're not trying to optimize routes or optics within fiber, whatever, they're specializing here. And so that's shaping out like that. And the data center business, most data centers, they were one of two types in general, not speaking about the military. There was a local on-premise that you would see at a university or a hospital or something like that, some infrastructure, or there was a multi-tenant. And the main role of a data center is to have a reliable 100% up electronic environment that is safe, that's operated to a certain best practice. And many organizations just didn't have, it was either too costly to put a server rack or two to build a data center on there. You know, if you were the local electrical supply or, you know, some
Yeah.
news agency, you wouldn't do that for yourself. You would want to go put it somewhere else because it's too much to do it for yourself. Or if it was large enough for you to do it for yourself, it's very difficult to keep up with the maintenance and the operation of that. And so this multi-tenant data center idea was born. Where that dynamically got changed was as these organizations we now call hyperscale. So those top 5, top 8, top 10 organizations, you've named some of them here. We would all know the names, the biggest IT buyers on earth.
Right.
They began building all their own. They want their own platform for the metaverse, for their search engine or whatever. But the capacity, as you know, where the more we use, the more we want. The more we want, the more we make. The more we make, the more we use. And all of a sudden, the ability of these organizations to keep up with the demand, not just to keep up in terms of building and staffing and operating, but where's the demand going to go? Is it going to go to Delhi? Is it going to go to Rio? Is it going to the 30 other provinces around those? Is it going to go to Ohio in the States? Like, we know the big cities, Northern Virginia, San Francisco, some of the London, Frankfurt, but what about these intermediate places? And how do I keep up? And what happens when I need 4? And so in the data center world, the need exploded. And what happened was operators like us became very close partners with these very large organizations or governments to work together to create a design so that we're implementing designs that work for them, but also at a speed, at an acceleration, and in particular, a scale. 3 years ago, 5 years ago, the scale of a data center, 1 million square feet was a monster. Like, that was huge, and maybe 80 megawatts. That was just a scale that we couldn't imagine 10 years ago. Now we're building out campuses that you need a nuclear reactor to run them, not a modular reactor, an entire nuclear reactor, 1,000, 1,200, 1,500 megawatts for a campus. This has been in the works now for a year or two, long before OpenAI and tools like that got unleashed on the public. And so the data center business is evolving at scale. It's evolving in its expertise of being efficient. It's evolving in how they're powered. It's evolving in how it's staffed and operated. It's really pretty amazing time to be involved in the digital infrastructure of the world.
Wonderful. No, I think you have aptly put that. One thing that I just a question that probably came out of this, as data centers are going bigger and bigger, and you may need a nuclear reactor to just power them up.
Mm-hmm.
Is it solely becoming a game of a big tech or big players, or there is market for newer startups? I mean, what are the entry points for smaller companies, for newer startups into this big game?
Yeah.
Or is it just beyond them?
Well, certainly there is a barrier to entry to get involved. I wouldn't say it's beyond them, but it depends on what type of data center you're talking about. I'm not going to get into the myth of the edge data center because that's a complex conversation, and we probably wouldn't come to agreement. There's so many ways to look at that, but there are definitely tiers. And so if you think of a supermarket, for example, there's a supermarket here in the States at a small community that's a certain size that has a certain amount of variety. If I go to the next larger town, I have a larger, right? If I get to a major city or a very specific type of community where I have a bunch of nuance and what we would call here a supermarket. Well, in our data center world, if I'm providing data center services for one of these top 8, top 10, or even the federal government in the United States or an international government, There's an economy of scale that we're building to, both on a campus and within a building. And so I don't know, we're still developing on what that largest size looks like, but they are hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of investment per campus, probably even exceeding that, probably estimating low. And so that is a tremendous barrier to entry. But if you're building a data center in a rural community in the States, in a moderate size Iowa university, it's probably going to be considerably smaller. The campus might be larger, but the facility is going to be a modular facility that can be expanded in the future. It is a tremendous barrier to entry to get into the larger, because it's not just, by the way, it's not just the funding, it's the people to get the right expertise, that have the right skill set, that want to come and work for an organization there to attract the talent with all the benefits and all the opportunity for them, not just on that one facility. What happens when that facility's done? Well, if I have a log of hundreds of, proposed hundreds of facilities across dozens of sites on a global footprint, there's a lot of opportunity there. So there is a barrier to entry, but data centers are all over the globe. I don't think it's impossible to get involved.
This leads to another question. I mean, you mentioned a couple of times the AI and the open AI, and I mean, the existence of data center and eventually the digitization of the information has led to the advances in AI, what we are seeing today. Had that information not been digitalized, nobody could really get to AI to where it is today, because they need data for reinforcement learning and all kind of a learning. Data centers play the key part. So, I mean, there were data centers, and you gave a great analogy of a retail store, a small retail store in a rural area versus a large mega store in a city. I mean, we have seen data centers getting distributed geographically. I mean, if I'm in Asia, it's reasonable to get my data stored near Asia, and so on and so forth, from where it's getting accessed, where it's getting stored. With this AI and all this kind of applications also coming in, do you see there's another classification of data centers coming? I mean, these data centers are kind of predominantly used for this particular kind of use case, or serving this tag. This is going to be a data centers that is going to, I mean, we have seen in the blockchain world, the mining, when everyone got crazy, putting in a lot of, they were not data centers per se, but they were kind of processing. So, I mean, do you see this kind of categorization also happening, and how AI is changing everything for data center people?
Certainly possible to a degree. Data centers themselves have evolved over the years. When 20 years ago, the resiliency needed to be built into a data center was much different. The designs were different then. They used to be what we called 2N in many cases, or the level of infrastructure resiliency, because the tools that were deployed within the data center, they all had to survive within that data center. Amazon famously, as far as I know, they were the first ones to coin this idea of what's called an availability model. And what that meant was, I'm not an Amazon employee, so hopefully I don't get this wrong, but as I recall, it was, I'm going to have my data in 3 geographic locations within a metropolitan area. So I'll have part of my job running on the north side of the town, part on the west side, part on the east side, whatever. But they're all connected by fiber in a very low latency, 2 millisecond or less loop. I can lose, it's almost like a RAID array in a computer system. I can lose any one of those. So my resiliency didn't have to come from that specific building. And so what that did was, for an operator like us, it freed up some of the extra infrastructure I had to put in to make sure that I had 2, in some cases 3 of everything needed. So if you imagine, it would be like if you drive across the Sahara Desert, you're going to have 4 water tanks, you're going to have 6 tires, you're going to see tires across the rack of your vehicle, you've got stores of food. When you switch and you're driving into a major metropolitan area, you don't have all of that stuff because there's no need. The resiliency of your vehicle, you're not in a harsh environment, you're driving on a road, you need one spare tire, you need extra gas, that's it. It's much more, it's no less safe, it's no less efficient. You just don't need all of that extra redundancy. And what that does is it drives down the complexity and it drives down the cost of operations. You get much more efficient at what you do. And so as data centers have evolved over time, as the customers that they're serving and the applications you're serving evolve, the applications are resilient to themselves across fiber networks, across infrastructure. And so it allows me to make a data center that I'm not stranding capital, I'm not stranding resources, I'm able to make a wildly efficient, highly reliable infrastructure that also gets a level of resiliency by distributing it across multiple data centers. So we're seeing that all over the place. How that affects future growth of the size and the scale, we're still working on it. We're all still learning. I mean, this is unprecedented time that we're living in as we're trying to learn. We've got our mission parameters on efficiency and how we want to operate these things. What the final designs will look like. It used to be that data centers were all single story. Now they're multiple story because to go up is easier than to go wide. Again, being good stewards of land and resources around us. And there's what the critical mass on what that size would look like. We're not sure yet. We do know that the campuses are getting larger, which in another way is very beneficial because I can build an ecosystem. I can build a fiber ecosystem. I can build a power ecosystem. I can build a logistics ecosystem there that is exponentially more efficient to have 8, 10, 15 buildings on a campus than to just have one data center sitting on that part of town and another one on that side of town. To put them together in campuses at the scale and the efficiency that we need them to operate is another way that this infrastructure is evolving.
We are running out of our time. I mean, 30 minutes, but I feel we can talk for next at least 10 hours. I mean, we are just starting to scratch the surface. So this warrants a few more discussions, not just one more.
Sure.
But before I let you go,
Yeah.
one thing, David, that you mentioned, I mean, so data centers are getting huge, and we have seen with the blockchain, I mean, to mint something, we were consuming energy that probably can light up an entire city for a month or something like that. And you mentioned a few times that you want to be responsible towards Earth as well. So help us understand how the data center technology is really evolving. I mean, I can still remember those early papers where Google has put together a bunch of ordinary hard drives to create their data center versus where we are today. So how you're making sure that we also take care in data centers about the clean energy, the environmental aspects of it, and be responsible towards that, because that's very important.
It's super important. It's one of the most important things about what we do. We take very seriously being good stewards of not just the environment, but capital and people. All of those things have to come together. There has to be social responsibility. There has to be environmental and energy responsibility. And there has to be governance around that. You have to, and so there are a number of ways that this is evolving. One, if you notice, go out to any industry report, global report on the proliferation of data, which is going to live in a data center, how much more data is being generated, how many more data centers, whether it's the size of them or the number of them. And if you compare the growth of data generation to energy consumed by data centers, we're actually spectacularly efficient. We've become exponentially more efficient. Our energy consumption is not proceeding at the same growth as data generation, not even close. It's much, much smaller. You can go back and find reports 20 years ago that said, data centers are going to do these things. It's going to be this dire consequence. And we certainly have to be, everybody has to be aware about carbon and energy responsibility. So in our world, we have it, for my organization in particular, but our industry in general, We have energy teams. We have environmental teams that report to the board that are responsible for how we buy power. How do we deploy power? How do we build designs? What are the materials that we're using when we build a data center? How do we operate them? How do we use AI to help balance, whether it's self-developed, which we have both machine learning and artificial intelligence infrastructure for our tools that we've built, proprietary tools or other tools that we leverage to make sure we're operating these spectacularly efficiently. And because we have customers, we're multi-tenant in many cases, we also allow them to tap into our tools so they can manage their own environments efficiently. I mentioned energy buying. How are we buying energy resources, whether it's an intermittent resource like solar or wind, or a green energy like hydro or clean natural gas or nuclear, in all of these ways, how are we managing that? We're working water out of our designs so that we're not consuming water resources. So that's one part of it. The other part is social responsibility. If we're building the infrastructure, I think our industry is one of the most important on earth today. As I said at the beginning of our conversation, there is no modern economy. Human beings cannot raise themselves up to a better standard of living without digital infrastructure. So that gives us an opportunity as we hire people to hire non-traditional people. In my industry, it used to be a bunch of old guys who look and sound just like me. So how do I hire different genders? How do I hire different age groups? And how do I onboard them to get them not only to help build out this infrastructure, but help us to influence social reform the way that we think is responsible? And then lastly, I would just say, all of that's great marketing hype, but if you don't have a governance, if you don't have auditing that comes along and says this is what they declared they were going to do and this is what they're actually doing, and then publish it and report it, who knows if it's true. I'll be generous and say it's not, but you have to have those things. And so the more sophisticated we get, the more that we're consuming resources, the better stewards we have to be. And so we make ourselves transparent, the industry in general, my organization in particular, to report these ESG reports and to manage through those. And we could talk about just this topic for quite a while. I know we're out of time, but those are some big milestones that we think about on how we're going to continue to be good stewards of the resources that we're responsible for.
I think that's wonderful. And you hit it on the right. I mean, you can have all the marketing fluff, but if nobody's auditing that and publishing that, then it remains a lip service. So I'm glad that the data center as an industry, they are aware of this and working towards it. So David, I thought we were going to talk a lot, and we're going to talk a lot about AI and whatnot, but I mean, the answers that you started giving were so interesting that I keep finding more and more pieces out of that. So as I said earlier, we need to have a few more episodes together. I just keep every single episode a little shorter so that it remains consumable.
Sure.
So I'll just take a break today, but Thank you for helping us generally understanding how the data centers have evolved and what they are looking up to and where the world is heading with them. So thank you very much for being on our show today.
I look forward to our next conversation. I'd love to talk about AI. It's a lot of fun. Until
Absolutely.
then,
my team will be setting up an AI kind of podcast with you because we are doing a lot of AI podcasts these days.
Okay, perfect. Have a great day. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.